Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine, the first woman to announce a serious bid for the White House.
I am now proud and honored to nominate the senior senator from the great Republican state of Maine, Senator Margaret Chase Smith.
How does history define taking a stand? Does it have to take place on a foreign battlefield? Or can it unfold on the United States Senate floor? Can it change the course of history? It can, and in the case of Margaret Chase Smith, numerous stands over a congressional tenure of over 30 years. Smith took a stand for America's conscience in denouncing the tactics known as McCarthyism, while paving the way for women in the military and in politics.
Now everyone knows she's a ramblin' rose, she's a beauty growing wild.
New inventions and progressive ideas have swept the nation during the 1920s. Women are entering the workforce and gracing the national spotlight fighting for suffrage. However, Washington, D.C. is still exclusive to men. One lady in Skowhegan, Maine is determined to change this. This lady is Margaret Chase, who has just skyrocketed to fame after becoming the president of the Business and Professional Women's Club of Maine. Clyde Smith, a prominent Maine politician, and Margaret Chase were married in 1930. She continued to serve on the Republican State Committee, but after Clyde won the 1936 U.S. congressional election, the Smiths were off to Washington, with Margaret becoming her husband's assistant. In 1940, Congressman Smith died unexpectedly. Maine elected for Margaret to fill his seat. Determined to keep her husband's seat, she ran for election in November, winning 65% of the vote.
She had the opportunity to get into the Congress, and she was determined to stay.
Well, when she first goes into office in 1940, the war is going on in Europe. And then after Pearl Harbor, in December of 1941, then the United States will be more fully involved in the war.
Before the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, Smith remarked, "The real attack will be by the way of the sea." Taking frequent tours of military bases, Smith gained a reputation for favoring a strong military. When legislation for the Women's Armed Services Integration Act reached the Armed Services Committee, she voted in favor of integrating women into the armed services in permanent regular status and reserve status. Her cohorts unanimously objected. Congresswoman Smith was the only one to take a stand for women in the military. She proposed an amendment which was defeated. Undeterred, she brought the act into conference, where her amendment was adopted and ultimately passed in the House and Senate.
During the Truman administration, she fought very, very hard to make sure that women had permanent status in the military. And she just said, if the military wants these women, if they need these women, then they need to have the same rights and privileges that the men do.
The significance is that until 1948, when Congress allowed women to join the regular military, we were only allowed to serve in times of national emergency. She's known as the mother of the waves. She understood that women had the competency and the potential to serve in the regular armed forces. So she paved the way for all women who've served since 1948 because she had the courage to stand for her convictions.
After this victory for military women, Smith set her eyes on the Senate, winning the election in a landslide vote. The nation was stunned. For the first time in history, a woman was elected to both houses of Congress. It was on the Senate floor Senator Margaret Chase Smith made her most profound mark on American history. In 1950, a Cold War was brewing between Truman's America and the Communist Soviet Union. Fear of possible communist infiltrations escalated in American cities, partly due to the notorious Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy claimed to possess a list of communists, including employees at the State Department, leading to the assembly of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Senator Smith grew wary of McCarthy's belligerent accusations.
The excesses of those committees and being able to subpoena anybody to come to the committee and really have their careers ruined was what was happening in the backdrop of what we call the Cold War. Lawyers, teachers, politicians of opposing political views, artists, filmmakers, actors, were all targeted by these commissions looking at un-American activities. It was sort of a trial, an informal public kangaroo court.
She was not convinced that, first of all, what he was doing was right, but even more importantly, that he had the evidence to back up the charges that he was issuing. And he gave that speech, and very quickly people began to call for evidence. And Margaret Chase Smith was one of the first people in the Senate to come to him and ask him.
With no opposition from either party, Smith decided to take a stand against McCarthy's tactics. On June 1, 1950, Senator Margaret Chase Smith gave her Declaration of Conscience. Smith emphasized the tactics of McCarthy and defended American rights.
As an American, I want to see our nation recapture the strength and unity it once had when we fought the enemy instead of ourselves.
Senator Smith's courage in her stand against McCarthyism led to his censure in 1954.
The Declaration of Conscience was so important in American history. Senator Margaret Chase Smith, who was the only woman in the United States Senate at the time, really felt like she should do something about it. Of course, McCarthy didn't back down, really tried to destroy her political career. Newspaper editorialists across the country and other politicians, including President Truman, were very, very supportive of what she had done and said it was one of the most important things that had been done in the country's history at the time. But it did save the country from the grip of fear, and I think that's why it's so important today.
The Republican Party punished her in lots of little ways because she was a traitor. And that's how she was seen at the time. It was the one thing that she never regretted having done, was that she spoke up for her conscience.
As a possible candidate for president, I think she's a very formidable political figure.
Would you vote for a woman for president?
No.
They're lucky to be congressmen.
I would, because all the things that are happening today will be accomplished by women.
Speculation surfaced in 1963 about a presidential run for the lady from Maine. On January 27, 1964, Margaret Chase Smith threw her bonnet into the ring for the Republican presidential race of 1964. In a characteristically charming speech, Smith noted she had more experience than the other candidates. She admitted it would be a tough bid, with the campaigns of millionaire Nelson Rockefeller and staunch conservative senator from Arizona Barry Goldwater well underway.
I have decided that I shall.
Through this, Senator Margaret Chase Smith took a stand for women in politics by paving the way for future female contenders for the presidency. Senator Smith campaigned in primaries, often coming in fourth place. She did not, however, neglect her Senate duties, maintaining her perfect roll call attendance. The Smith for President campaign made it to the San Francisco GOP convention, coming in second place behind Barry Goldwater with 27 delegates. It was a historic candidacy, with Smith becoming the first woman to be nominated for president at a major party's convention.
Women in political life is a difficult story to trace in a lot of ways. In politics, a lot of it is a fundraising issue because with each of these steps, Margaret Chase Smith in 64, Shirley Chisholm that followed after that, Geraldine Ferraro in the vice presidential nomination in the 1980s, what Hillary Clinton and others have been doing in the last couple of election cycles, each of those gets us further along the road. And so it's becoming accepted, it's becoming less surprising to people, and it's becoming more financially feasible for women to make those kinds of runs.
One thing that I quickly realized in getting into politics is that, well, I had a twofold, not only being a woman, but being a black woman. Oftentimes, the males, they already have their steps cleared for them when it's their turn to run for office. Women, we're in the phase of trying to get our professional life together, being a mother, being a wife, and then after the fact, we're older and then we're getting into office. And we haven't had the connections like many of these males.
After being defeated in her fifth re-election campaign, Senator Smith returned to Skowhegan to advise current representatives. Sadly, in May 1995, at 97, Smith passed away. Her legacy lives on through the numerous courageous stands she took during her career for servicewomen, against the tactics of McCarthy, and for accepting women in public service. Margaret Chase Smith was unafraid of being a powerful leader and doing what was once deemed impossible.
But is this country sophisticated enough to elect a woman?
Why not?
Leave it to the chicks. They've got a million magic tricks to change